For 5 years, I was a youth minister, and so you might have heard before, once a youth minister, always a youth minister, or, fill in whatever you want. But today, you probably caught the theme that we're talking about salt and light. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to start in the dark. Now, as I speak here, your eyes are probably adjusting. There's some light in this room, but maybe before you have been in this room with zero lights on it. The scariest place in the world is a church building at night with nobody in it. And so I've been in this room a few times before, and what I do is I stop at that exit door over there, and I will not walk across this. You don't know what's in here, at night, what could be lurking. So I don't even start walking in here until my flashlight's on. Try not to blind you all too much. And what you notice is how much one light makes a difference. In fact, we could all see who was on their phones this whole time I've been talking, because one light makes a big difference, especially in a dark room. But you know what makes even a bigger difference? Is if you all turn on all of your lights. Go ahead and do that. So I'm going to kind of blind you here. Let's not blind each other too much. Because now all of a sudden, it feels like a concert, and that's really fun. But also now, if the power went off in here, what we realize is that we could just open those doors, but also we could see this way too, So light, especially in a dark place, makes a big difference. Now, we'll turn on the big ones. Almost tripped there. That would have made everybody's day, I know. You would have loved that, yeah. Welcome to Crosspoint this morning. My name is Kale Courtright, a very athletic, didn't fall preacher here, though it was close. So y'all would have loved that, right? We are in the Sermon on the Mount right now, so if you have your Bible, I want to encourage you to turn to Matthew chapter 5. Sermon on the Mount is Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And it's there that we started a couple weeks ago, and we're going to be for a few more weeks. It's an important teaching that we want to plant our life in. We want to root and spend some time in it, especially if we consider ourselves followers of Jesus. I would argue it's an important place for us to center, because in all of the Scripture, there is not another place that Jesus speaks longer without interruption. Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 is where Jesus gives his kingdom vision. And so if you are a Jesus person, if you want to follow him, then it is a teaching that you should know. And so last week we put some challenges before you. They'll be up here again. If you have not had the opportunity to consider one, to commit to one, we want to encourage you to do that now. They're going to put it on the screen right now, so you can do the QR code here in just a second. It's coming, I promise. Ready? There you go. So last week, about 120 adults committed to something, which is about half of you right now, okay? First service, they didn't do it at all, I bet, right? So it was half of this service. But we want to give you an opportunity to participate. There are multiple options here, whether it's that you choose to memorize it along with us, that many of us have taken on that challenge, or whether you'll read the sermon every day, read it aloud with your family. You'll use the sermon as a journal, like prayer prompts, or even if you'll create some kind of art around it. Now, last week I told you how I got some AI art between services. Well, this week we had another member who went to AI and said, write me a song based on this. And I went to Matt and I said, listen, have you heard this song yet? Let it play for a while. He said, no, I haven't heard it. And you would think that you heard it on the radio. I mean, that's a topic for another day, how like scary good artificial intelligence is, but incredible. I was explaining to someone else, like, but who sang the song? And I was like, no, the machine sang the song. And they were like, no, but whose voice is it? And I was like, it's no one's voice. Yeah, try to wrap your mind around that for a minute. So I'm going to make a big claim here that I have made before, but the Sermon on the Mount to me is the most important teaching that has ever been given in the world. It is what launched a movement that changed the world. You cannot argue that Jesus changed the world. Whether you are a follower or not, you have to recognize how the person of Jesus of Nazareth changed the whole world. And it's because of this teaching. It starts right here in Matthew chapter 5. And again, so if you claim to be a Jesus person, this is a teaching that you should know. All of those challenges we put before you, they're mostly suggestions. We want you to take part in them, to do it together. It's better to do things together. They're not like New Year's resolutions. If you haven't started yet, that's okay. Jump in today. If you said, I want to read it every day, but, well, this past week I read it 3 times, well, let's stop right there for a minute. You read the Sermon on the Mount 3 times in a week? That's wonderful. That's great. So don't let it be something that is kind of like just another task to do that one day you quit, and so then you just quit. One day you miss it, so then you just quit. Don't do that. Let it be my hope for you is that it's a teaching that first permeates your mind, that gets imprinted on your mind, and then it invades your heart and your life. That's how most things have to happen for us, that we learn something, whether intellectually or emotionally, and then we start to know it in our hearts. And so I want you to know this teaching, and so you can do something else around it if you want. This teaching is important. And last week we started with the Beatitudes. And it should not be lost on us that Jesus starts from a place of blessing. That Jesus starts and he gathers a group of people, and he does not say, if you do all of these things, then you'll be blessed. If you'll live into this teaching, then you will be blessed. Jesus says, you are blessed. You are already blessed. That's the kind of God we serve, that he starts from a place of blessing. And then the teaching continues here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand and gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So Jesus has gathered this group of people on the mountainside, and he's giving them this teaching. He's blessed them, and now he's telling them who they are. He's going to start from a place of identity. And here he picks up some very ordinary things, salt and light. And we might ask ourselves, why these metaphors? Why these elements? What is it about salt and light that Jesus wants us to know? Because you and I both know that we can use those to make all kinds of metaphors. What is Jesus trying to tell us? And so we're going to jump into that. But first, what I want you to hear, what I want you to know is that this is about your identity. Is that Jesus has said the kingdom has come near. The kingdom is coming. This is who you are. This is who you are based on the fact that the kingdom is here. So first, salt. I have a good friend, and he was telling me a story about how his child wanted to go and bake something, and she had done some work in the kitchen with them, and so they said, sure, go ahead. She wanted to bake chocolate chip muffins, I think it was, and it smelled pretty good, and they were watching it, and you know how when things bake, you're like, I want to be part of that, I want to eat that, and so whatever it is, typically, it just kind of, gets your, you start getting ready for it, your stomach is ready for it. So these muffins came out, they let them cool for a minute, and then they took a bite. And what they realized is that rather than like half a cup of sugar, half a cup of salt was added. And can you imagine? I mean, the average recipe for cookies has like a lot of sugar and a little salt. Imagine just like swapping those. Somebody try that this afternoon and let us know how it goes, okay? Don't share those cookies, but let us know how we don't want them, but we want to know how it goes. Salt is really important, but it's important to have it at the right dose. You don't want too much salt, and you don't want too little salt. Salt is one of the most important elements in the world, and it has been essentially since the dawn of time. Some have argued that salt essentially ran the world for a time. You and I don't use salt typically in this way, but when salt was used to preserve things, it was one of the most important things for you to have. You and I get our food and we stick it in a refrigerator and it lasts for, however long it's supposed to last. I don't ever know exactly. I have to ask my wife for that. But but it lasts for a while. But salt helped meat to be preserved. And so it was very important. In fact, you could argue that it was running the world. There was even a time in human history where soldiers especially were not paid in any type of money, they were paid in salt. That you would go to war and your payment for that would be so much salt. In fact, salt is where the word for salary comes from. It's that important. Is it worth its salt? You may have heard before. So salt is universal. It's something that everybody knew, and I think in part Jesus uses that salt because of that. Again, we can talk about it in any number of ways. Are we called salt because we're supposed to preserve things? You might have heard that sermon before. Are we called salt because we're supposed to flavor the world, bring out its flavor? You've probably heard that sermon before. What is Jesus trying to tell us when he uses salt as an example? And I think to understand why he says salt, we first have to look at light. After all, he talks about them together. Now, I have told you this before, probably last week, and I'm going to keep telling you this because I don't want you to forget it. Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount in an actual time and an actual place. There is a mountain that they believe today still exists where Jesus was sitting when he gave this teaching. You can go there today. Maybe. I don't know. But you can go there, you can sit there, and that they believe this is where Jesus gave it. It's very easy for us, especially with the access we have to Scripture, to jump into his teachings and immediately start to apply it, which is good. You should read the Scriptures. You should apply it to your life. You should think, God, how are you speaking to me in this? But we can, in some ways, forget that this was actually said, that this was given. Jesus sat up there in the region of the Sea of Galilee. He sat down and he gave this message. He's looking out to a group of people. He gives this message. Why is he talking about light? What is he trying to say to us in that? I think here's what's going on. He's sitting and off into the distance, probably over here for him, he can see the Sea of Galilee. They're looking down on it. And the Sea of Galilee is an important place. It's the largest freshwater lake in Israel. We call it the Sea of Galilee because of the word that they use. We translate it to sea. It's not salt water, it's fresh water. And so because of that, it's an important place for them to be. And so they lived all around it. In fact, on the far side, where Jesus probably was, on the far side of the sea, there was a hill. And it's as if Jesus is standing there and he goes, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill, and they all are looking. A town built on a hill that we can all see. It's probably daylight, but every night, they know what he's talking about. Every night you can see the towns around the Sea of Galilee. They exist till today. You can see where the people live. You can see where the people are. He's pointing to a place that actually exists, and he says, you are the light of the world. A town on a hill can't be hidden. We can see that town. Light for us, of course, is very different today. We can shut off these lights. We can turn them back on. We are only truly in the dark if there's a problem, which occasionally we do run into. Maybe you're out camping and you run out of batteries for your flashlights or for your lantern. I don't know. Before Christmas, there was about 3 weeks where the street lights and the gas station closest to my house were just not on. Church buildings at night are creepy, but also gas stations at night that are normally lit up that aren't. And people are still getting gas there. I got to be honest, I drove past it to a different gas station because it just seemed strange. There's no lights. In fact, there's some lesson in there. When there's supposed to be light in the place, and now there's not, it's significant. It's significant when there's supposed to be light, and there's no longer light. So Jesus is trying to tell us something here. He's saying you're the salt of the earth. Maybe it's for flavor. Maybe it's to preserve. You're the light of the world. And maybe it's to illuminate the dark. Maybe it's to help other people see. But when we put these together, I think there's a lesson he wants us to learn. Now, before I tell you what that is, there are two things I want you to note. The first is this, That Jesus says to this group of people, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. This is a group of people that lived in the region of Sea of Galilee. These are largely misfits. They are hungry, they are sick, they are poor, and they come to Jesus for a teaching, and largely they probably want something else from him, don't they? They want to be whole again. Whether it's they want to be healed physically, they want to be fed, whatever the case may be, they're coming to him for something else, most likely. Jesus is calling them to himself, and he teaches them, and he starts with blessing them, and then he is now going to talk about who they are. And he turns and he says, you can be the salt of the earth. One day you can work to become the light of the world. That's not what he says. Right? He looks at this group of misfits and he says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. It's not someday. It's not if you work hard enough. It's not if you do the teaching I'm about to give you perfectly. Note that he tells them who they are before they can do what he asks them to do. That Jesus says, you are blessed. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. This is who you are. You don't have to do anything. Because of who he is, I think it's what Jesus is saying. Because of who I am, this is who you are. You're part of my kingdom. And so we read this, and we read the rest of the sermon understanding who he has already made us to be. This is already who you are in Jesus Christ. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And the second thing I want you to note here is that when he says you are, these are plural words. Now, this is where our language occasionally lets us down, especially when we use a word like you. Because Jesus, yes, he's talking to a group of people, and so he's saying you. Is he talking about them individually, or is he talking about them as a group? Well, if we were to write this in the Texan, you might write, y'all are the salt of the earth. Y'all are the light of the world. It's a plural you. And I understand that that's maybe how we would address a whole group. But it should not be lost on us. In our day and age, in 2025, we think almost always in terms of the individual. Jesus is addressing this to a group. Yes, there are implications for the individual, but there's also a collective identity that he's trying to build here. Because in the day of Jesus, it was almost always about the collective, not the individual. Almost always about the collective. And so he's looking out at a group of people and he's saying, you all are the salt of the earth. Together, you are the light of the world. This is who you are. Jesus came and he said, I'm adding you to my kingdom, to a group, to a body, to what you will call a church. Jesus came to form a group, to form a new humanity, a new group of people in his kingdom. So salt, it flavors, it preserves, light, it shines and illuminates the darkness. It helps us to see. And I think the first thing we see is that the kingdom is for the sake of others. The kingdom is for the sake of others. We've been saying it all year. You're going to keep hearing it. But our mission here at Crosspoint is to make and grow disciples of Christ. That's what we are about. Help you further your discipleship. Help you grow in those ways, to become the apprentice of Jesus that Steve mentioned earlier. But ultimately, we are not for just what we do here. We are for others. We are for the world. Our calling is to make disciples. And so what we want to be about are people who do not yet know Jesus. That's what it means to live the Jesus way. Both salt and light only matter in how they impact somebody else. Salt and light only matter in how they impact another. It does not matter how much salt you have. It does not matter what you do with it if it stays in its shaker. It only matters if you use it. Light, as Jesus says, you don't hide it. The purpose of light is to shine in the darkness. They don't matter for themselves. They matter for how they are used for somebody else. And so too, it is with you. your presence matters in how you impact other people. If you're going to be the salt, you have to flavor the world, preserve the other. It's not just about you. And so our task in Jesus to be part of this kingdom is to represent him, to bring forth his kingdom. Salt, how it impacts the world. Light, and how it shines in the darkness. This is who we are called to be. But Jesus then immediately gives a warning. We are not going to be just about ourselves. We are going to be for the others. And then Jesus says this, don't be diminished. This is who you are called to be, but don't be diminished. Be the salt. Be the light. It almost sounds to me like a joke when Jesus says, if a salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? If salt loses its saltiness, what is it anymore? What is it? It's nothing. It's not worth anything. Jesus is essentially saying, if this thing is not the thing, then it's no longer the thing. You know what I mean? Maybe? What Jesus is saying here is that our presence matters and how it impacts the others around us. We have to live into this identity, not to be diminished. Jesus issues a pretty strong warning here. Salt that isn't salty is worth nothing. Salt that isn't salty is worth nothing. Now, throughout Christian history, we are really good at being salt, but with the wrong dose. We're really good at under-seasoning things. You've probably been to a friend's house before and they serve you some dish and you're like, okay, it's fine, pass the salt. And you just keep using it, you know? And they're like, are you good? And you're like, well, I didn't make it, you know, so. And you realize it just needs salt to just kind of get through the day. We're really good at under-seasoning. And by that I mean, you know, we don't want to offend other people. We don't want to force our beliefs on them. You know, people believe different things today, and so we just better take a step back. We're really good at under-seasoning. We're also good throughout our history in over-seasoning and saying, you know what? Let me grab as much power and dominance as I can to force you to live like I do, to force you to believe like I do, to force the world to adopt this way of life. We're really good at under-seasoning, and we're really good at over-seasoning. And neither are a blessing to the world. Jesus calls us to be the salt, and the dose matters. Light is the same way. Light that's too dim or too far away is not good for anyone. Light largely also, like I just blinded some people here a minute ago with the flashlight, when it's too close, that's no good for anyone as well. We are called to be the salt and light, and it matters the dose that we give the world. Too little is pointless, too much is horrible. We want to give the right amount. Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, when Jesus calls his disciples the salt instead of himself, this transfers his efficacy on the earth to them. He brings them into his work. In church, your identity as one of the members of his kingdom, your identity as salt and light means that he is putting you to work in the world today. He's putting you to work in the world today. Bonhoeffer would go on to write, the call of Jesus Christ means being salt of the earth or being destroyed. Because salt that isn't salty is good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. This is who we are called to be, to put our lives into action. And so I want you to consider the implications for a moment this morning. To live this story out today, we must take to heart what Jesus says. That if we give up our distinctiveness, if we give up our identity in Christ, you may not can regain it. The danger for Christians in every generation is becoming indistinguishable from the world around them. The danger for Christians in every generation is becoming indistinguishable from the world around us. It's what it looks like is when our values are no different from our neighbors or the world around us. The way we spend our time, the attitudes we have for others and the things going on, the pursuits that we have, and lastly, the way that we love others. If it looks the exact same, then we lose our distinctiveness. We are called to be salt. We're called to be light. And it's all about how we impact those around us. Your part matters, even if it is a small part to play. Just like the fun youth group game we played earlier. One light makes a little difference. 100 lights make a big difference. Imagine our world. Imagine the Arlington, Grand Prairie, Mansfield area of the Metroplex if everyone was shining their light in the way that God has intended it. If everyone, wherever it is that you live, wherever it is that you work, was being the salt right there, imagine the difference it makes in this community. This is who we are called to be. So, as we close this morning, there's something that I want you to do. And you can start thinking about it right now. God puts you in places, and I believe He puts you for a reason. He calls you to a place for a reason. It may be the place that you live. It may be the place that you work. It may be some other place that you frequent, like a grocery store. I don't know. But I believe that God puts people in our path. Who has God been putting in your path? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of one name that God may be calling you to become salt or light for them. One name. Who is that person? And then what I want you to do is to start praying over them. I want them to be part of your normal prayer life, that God would bless them, that if they are far from God, that they would return to Him. If they have never met Jesus, that they would do so. Start praying for this one person, and that you might be the salt and light in their life. Recently, I heard Bob Goff tell the story that when he first moved into his neighborhood, early one morning he heard some rustling outside his house, and he just assumed it was raccoons, and so he went out there and was ready for war, And so he got out there. It wasn't raccoons, but it was his neighbor out messing in his side yard. And what he found out is his neighbor was just trying to take his trash can to the curb for him. And as he got to know this guy, he realized that he takes the trash can out for everybody on their street. And how much of a blessing it is, not just for him, but for those who maybe have trouble. It's just a small thing, motivated by great love. It doesn't take a lot to be the salt and light in our world today. If you're choosing to live in a different way than those around you, even doing small things for one person can make a huge difference. Who is that person for you? As we close today, our shepherds and their wives will be around the room. And our invitation for you every single week is to pray with you. That we know you bring in many prayer needs and concerns each and every week, and our promise is to walk with you in those. Today, there are many of you in here who have never accepted the call to be part of the kingdom of God, that never put Jesus on in baptism, and we would love to talk to you about that today as well. Maybe today, if you've already thought of who that one person is, I'd love for you to start praying about them right now with these shepherds. If we can help you in any way, won't you come while we stand and sing?